Good morning, everyone. It's Lee Henson, President and Founder of Agile Dad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the importance of having a sprint goal. Now, what's interesting about this is that many people, or many organizations, I should say, teams, don't necessarily understand how the sprint goal ties into everything that we do. Yes, I did say everything. In fact, I would argue that the sprint goal isn't just the heartbeat of Scrum, but it's almost like the common denominator that ties all of the events, all of the Scrum events, all of the 5 events together. So I wanted to give you a quick example of each one, and I wanted to talk to it so that you could see how this all just kind of fits together like a great puzzle, right? Because it does. If you can nail your sprint goal, that's going to give you just some incredible leg room to do some other amazing things. So let's talk about the sprint first, right? So that's the first of the Scrum events we're going to talk about. So the time box during which the development team attempts to build a product increment to achieve the sprint goal. That's the definition of a sprint, right? So whether you're doing 2-week sprints, 4-week sprints, 1-week sprints, I don't care. It's just that sprint is the time box period where the goal is the sprint goal. So it makes sense that it would tie in there, right? What about during sprint planning? This is where selecting the product backlog items and creating a plan to meet the sprint goal is crafted. That's what the whole meeting is for, right? So it's one of these things where if we're trying to meet the objective of the meeting, then a sprint goal should be the outcome. What about a daily stand-up or a daily scrum? That's where we optimize the probability of us reaching that sprint goal. And we talk about what we need to do to pivot, adjust, and to avoid impediments or outside interruptions so that we can meet the sprint goal. What about the review? This is where we gain feedback from all the stakeholders on a current product increment that we're building so that we can see how close we are to meeting the sprint goal and what we need to do to meet the next sprint goal so we can establish ourselves and to get to where we need to be. Finally, in a retrospective, when we're inspecting what we did last sprint with regard to people, relationships, processes, tools, other things that are going on, the sprint goal actually plays a pivotal role here too. Because as we reflect on the overall process, part of that reflection should include our sprint goal and whether or not we met our objectives, and to make sure our sprint goal was understood and that communication was there and collaboration was there and all the tools that we needed to be successful were present. So interestingly enough, the sprint goal fits in every single one of the events. I mean, you're only allowed to make changes during a sprint as long as your sprint goal is not at risk. So the only reason for ever canceling a sprint is if a sprint goal becomes obsolete. So if you use that as your, how shall I put it, litmus test to see whether or not sprint goal is important, you'll learn quickly that the sprint goal dictates which changes are allowed and whether a sprint's still relevant or matters. I mean, I think that makes it pretty relevant, right? I think that makes it pretty important. In fact, one would go as far as say, and I read this in an article recently, they said Scrum loses its purpose without sprint goals. And I think that makes sense, right? I believe it was on scrum.org that I saw that article. But nonetheless, somebody said, quote, that, and it was a trainer who was mentioning this. And he said, somebody mentioned to him that a sprint goal is a nice to have. It's optional. It isn't crucial to apply when you're doing Scrum. And I was like, wow. And they went on as far as to say that sprint goals should only be used when it suits your specific situation. Now, the author went on to point out that the sprint goal isn't an artifact. Now, just because something's not an artifact doesn't mean it's not important, right? And I think that sometimes when you don't make something mandatory, it tends to lose its bite. And I'm not saying that this is something that should be added to or how should I put, codified in the Scrum guide. But what I am saying is that the sprint goal is probably an important piece of what we do. And I think too many people look past it as being one of the core tenets, core virtues of Scrum. In my own mind, I see the heartbeat of Scrum, the cadence of Scrum being a sprint heartbeat. I see teams and delivery organizations building products or services that are incredible. But I also see the opportunity to really understand what a sprint goal is. And I'm going to share with you a quick story of something that happened. And this was really what set it straight for me. I was in a large electronics company. And while I was there, I had an opportunity to meet one of the people who worked there, a young lady. She was just the nicest young lady you'd ever meet. And she was hopping on an elevator with me. I said, what floor? She said, 8. I said, I'm going to 8 too. I don't think I've ever met you. She says, I'm Susie. I said, pleasure to meet you, Susie. I'm Lee, name protected. Our name changed to protect the innocent, right? So I said, what do you do, Susie? She said, I'm just a developer. I said, what just a product do you work on? And she told me. And I said, why? And she says, who are you? I said, this is a slow elevator. I said, you're Susie. I'm Lee. We already did that. I said, why do you work on that product? And she says, because that's what I get paid to do. And the more I thought about it, how many people are in organizations where they're surrounded by people who are just there because it's what they get paid to do? How many people are there because they don't know, they're there working for the paycheck, but they don't know who their target customer is, what problem they're trying to solve, what they're trying to do to make the world a better place. And it throws me for a loop when I see people who are that disconnected, right? But the unfortunate part is that it's more common than you think. I go into organizations more time than not that are struggling. And one of the consistent things that I see is that the sprint goal is not present, or if the sprint goal is present, it's not clear, or that there's a vision, but not a strategy for achieving the goal. So there's a lot of consistencies, a lot of things that I see that are happening over and over again. So keep in mind that sprint goal is important, that you should institute it, that you should talk about it. It should be an active part of everything from your planning all the way through to your retrospective. And that if you take the sprint goal seriously, you're going to have success using Scrum. That'll do it for today. As always, we encourage you, if you have something you want to talk about, don't hesitate to let us know. Learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.